So welcome back. So in previous lecture, this was the last slide where we were discussing about the variation of surface rupture in terms of the sense of movement or in terms of the displacement and the amount of displacement on fault or along the fault. And this what usually has been observed, that the maximum displacement will be in the area where you are having the maximum energy has been released at the time of the earthquake. So there you will have the amount of displacement will be comparatively larger in the center, and it reduces or become least on either side. So further, if we look at the pattern of rupture on that comes right up to the surface, so that again depends on the material. Now what you see in this photograph is that you have the very sharp rupture or the displacement, and here you have like or rolled on blocks which have been seen here in the on the ground, and this is not as sharp as what you see here. And now this depends on the material. So the pattern of rupture always depends upon the nature of material, and this parameter or the part will remain same for all faulting environment. So most important is here the material. So if you are having hard rock, then you will have very sharp displacement coming right up to the surface, but if you are having the loose material, then you will see that the scarp or the rupture is not prominent as compared to what we see here as a very sharp plane. Okay. And usually the normal fault in the upper part of the crust will deep up to 50 to 70 degrees, and further it has been taken into consideration based on the rupture pattern, that if you are having an earthquake which is less than 6.5 or 5.5, then you will not have the surface rupture coming right up to the surface. So this is the threshold limit or the threshold for the surface rupture to be reached, or faulting coming right up to the surface. The earthquake required is around 5.5 to 6.5. But in US, for the normal faults and other faults, it has been identified that the rupture is observed with the magnitude if it is greater than 7. Now further, it is important for us to understand what are the different signatures preserved in the stratigraphy, which helps us in identifying the paleo earthquakes in normal faulting environment. Now in this we will of course will try to look at the signatures. When we are talking about the stratigraphic evidence, then we are going to look at the sediment succession. So how best we will be able to differentiate the signatures of paleo earthquakes, and how best we will be able to assign that whatever we see the signatures are related to the paleo earthquakes and not to the depositional or non-depositional environment. So that we talked in the initial lectures where we were talking about the primary and the secondary features and all that. Okay. So here also we'll quickly look at that how we will be able to differentiate between, for example, the tectonic versus depositional features. Okay. So usually it is difficult for the geologist to identify faults in soft sediments. Okay. So mostly the structural geologist will it will be difficult for the paleoseismologist to make the structural geologists comfortable or it will be difficult for them to make them agree that what we see is the deformation related and not the depositional or erosional feature, because in hard rock it is easy to identify, as I was showing that in one one case where you were looking at in the previous slide, that you are having the scarp like this somewhere, and when the normal fault scarp, but in the another one you were having very sharp displacement. Okay. So normal fault usually accompany with development of fissures, and fissures filled with ruples. Okay. So you will not see a single line which has been observed at the time of an earthquake, but in case of the strike slip faulting, one can see polished slickened sides. So in normal faulting, as we, in one of the slide in the previous lecture we were looking at, that we will have the rupture in the along the multiple planes. Okay. And in of course you will have the displaced surfaces over here like this. Okay. But this can be due to the secondary effect also. If you have an lateral spreading or extensional cracks which are developed, can also mimic the normal faulting. So this is what has been we are trying to explain you, that in case of the strike slip faulting, to some extent, if we are able to see the fault plane, then we will be able to see the polished second slides. Nevertheless, we use geomorphology, and if we are able to expose the section, you will be able to justify that this faulting is related to tectonic or non-tectonic. Okay. And in case of the reverse fault or the thrust fault, then what you will see, either if you are having in the hard rocks, then you will see the brachiated contact along the fault plane. But in case of the soft material, so one of the slide, if you recall, I was trying to explain that what we call the orientation of the pebbles. For example, what we saw in one of the trench, that there was the gravels were been displaced, and you had an elongated gravels which were aligned along the fault plane, and that what we call the shear fabric or we can talk about that this is related to your faulting. So mainly what you will be able to see in case of the thrust faulting environment, then you will be able to see such brachiated contact in terms of you are having hard rock, but in case of the soft deposits, you will be able to see the shear fabric, typical shear fabric. So now let's look at the difference between the fault contact and the erosional contact, and this is very much similar to what we were talking about, the primary and secondary structure. And the previous slide we discussed about mainly the surface rupture, pattern of the surface rupture in unconsolidated and consolidated sediments or hard rock. So now in case of the unconsolidated loose material, what you will see, the fault contact usually will be steeper and very sharp, and in most of the cases we will not be able to see the primary structures. So no primary structures can be seen, only the shear fabric. That what I was explaining in the previous slide, that if you are having and one of the slide in the previous lectures I talked about, that we have we can see a shear fabric that is along your fault plane, and that can be looked at based on the preferred orientation of elongated clasts. Okay. So this is important, which you should remember, and that will help you in differentiating between the fault contact or erosional or depositional contact. And then fault contacts are straight and become steeper upward at the surface, or they may be gentler also. But then other parameters which you will take into consideration will help you in differentiating between the fault contact and the erosional contact. Whereas in the depositional contact or erosional contacts in unconsolidated sediments, they are usually gentler. So whereas here we see the steeper depths, because the contact will be like very much similar to the fault contact, but then you have to take into consideration what other parameters you are going to use. Primary structures are present, whereas here the primary structures will be absent. Few clasts will show the orientation near the contact. Contacts are not straight, they are concave upward. Okay. So these are the few points, and let's see the few examples which can help us in differentiating between the fault contacts. Okay. So what we see here is that, just remember that this will be a bit gentler, whereas this you will have the steeper contacts here, and you will see that very much preferred orientation of elongated clast, whereas in this case you will get few, but you will not be able to see the shear fabric. And in the case of the fault contact, you will not be able to see the primary structures, but here you will be able to see the primary structures. So this was the example which I was showing in one of the slide in the introduction part, where you can differentiate between the primary structure and the secondary structure, and this is what you are having, the erosional contact. You are having the erosional contact which is due to the erosion by a channel, a river channel, and you have a very gentle contact with respect to the adjacent layers or the succession, and also you see the sedimentary structures here. So this primary sedimentary structures can help in distinguishing between that what this contact exactly tells us, and since we have been able to see this in whole like in total, be able to judge easily that this portion with the trough like feature is nothing but the channel film. But in cases where I was showing in the initial lecture, I was showing this that if you and I discussed that if you just come across this part, then you may confuse, but in that case you will have to take into consideration the preferred orientation of the material here, and then or the shear fabric, and then the deformation in the sediments over here or in this region. That will help you that you are not having confusion between the primary structures and the sedimentary structure. That is what primary structures we are talking about, the sedimentary structures here. So this is a clear example of a paleo channel, and the contact which you see between the underlying deposits is your erosional contact. Now coming to this part here, as I was saying that if you see the part of this, okay, or probably the part of this, then you may mimic that as an fault. Now what do you see here is that you have an contact here. So the orientation or the structures, sedimentary structures, are horizontally stratified, and then you are having in contact like this, and then you have another primary structures here. Okay. Now this, whether this is a fault or this is related to your primary structure, that is your erosional contact. Okay. So distinguish between tectonic and non-tectonic, that is your depositional contact. Okay. Example, due to slumping in soft sediment, that is your gravity faults are also developed, which may mimic to your tectonic normal faults. Okay. So sometime you will come across that there is just because of the slumping along the weak plane, you may have a very sharp contact between the material which slumped down and the adjoining sedimentary succession, and that can mimic to the tectonic normal fault. Okay. This type of faults are curved and concave up in geometry. Okay. So this will be very much similar to what we were talking about in the channel fill deposit. Okay. So there will be concave up geometry. You will not see a very sharp and steep contact. Okay. So this is another example which you will remember that we are talking about this one. Okay. So contacts are not straight, okay, they are concave upward, and that is the same what we are talking about here. Okay. So the contacts are not safe. So this is again a non-tectonic contact. Now this part I briefly discussed earlier, but if you carefully look at, these are not all primary faults, but these are secondary faults which you can easily make out that they are related to the tectonic deformations. Okay. So you have the line which goes here, one marking the contact, sharp contact. Okay. Then another one is over here. Now one thing which I would like to emphasize here, that we are talking about the soft sediments and the or consolidated or unconsolidated sediments, but this what we see, the deformation are all in unconsolidated sediments. Okay, so you can easily many lines you will be able to pick up and draw, which shows the displacement and deformation. Okay, now based on the deformational feature which are on the either side of the fall plane, that helped easily that this is not related to the any erosional or depositional feature, but this is exactly what we are talking about, the tectonic features. Now if you see this part here, these layers are getting like this. Okay, and you have the fault that goes like that here, and even you can see the slight warping over here along this one, and even you'll be able to fix up at some location the very thin shear zone. Okay, very thin shear zone, which is you can see over here. Okay, so if you draw a line which goes like this, and then you have it here, and this is what you see in the plane. So plane is very sharp, but of course very steep here, even though it is in very loose sediment, and you have some faults, but these are all micro faulting. These are all micro faulting related to the large deformation in the area. You can see the folding here very clearly, and so on. Similar, this already we discussed, so I'll just go ahead. So normal fault scarps, if we look at, then what we have, we very clearly understood that we have the one block is moving down with respect to another one. Okay, so this is what this was the pre-faulting surface, and the slip has occurred along this plane and resulted into the formation of the scarp. Okay, so you will have on unconsolidated deposits, you will bound to see that you will have the scree material which is sitting on the fault scarp. So you have this one is the original surface, and you have the free face. So free face will be occupied by the colluvial material or debris. So you will have like the larger chunk of the blocks of the soil or the material, whatever is comprised of the area is comprised of. You will have the debris here, and then finer wash deposits or the slope deposits you will see at the toe of the scarp. Okay. So you have this the toe of that. Okay. So let's see in the detail what we have, like if we have the faulting taking place and what happens later on due to erosion. Okay. So we have like what we call the scarp degradation. Okay. Now again, as I have been telling, that few of the slides or what the part we are discussing here will remain same for any environment. Okay, irrespective of whether it is normal fault, faulting environment, extensional, compressional, or strike slip. So now coming to the fault scarp part, fault scarp degradation. Okay, so what we have is we may come across the cumulative fault scarps. Okay, so this is one, and this is the another one we are having, which was the recent one, but this is the older one. Okay, so you may come across the cumulative one, but for example, if you are having this one, which can be compared here, so you have the surface which is coming here, and displacement here, and then you goes down further down here. Okay, and then in here you are having some scree material, what we call the colluvium. Okay, so now let's see how the scarp over the time will get degraded and what profile we'll be able to see. So if you compare this one, that is the scarp C, then what profile you will see, the topographic profile is very gently coming here, then getting flat, and then from here you are having very sharp, and then so if you compare this and this one, you'll be able to judge that initially, because this is a recent displacement, so initially you will have very sharp free face or the free fault scarp, but over the time due to erosion you will have a very like smooth surface which will develop because of erosion and deposition. Okay. So let's see in detail what we will be able to understand with this. Okay. So after faulting, scarps are exposed to weathering and erosional processes. Okay. So degradation of scarp in unconsolidated sediments usually depends on the angle of repose, that is here the angle of the scarp face. Okay. So what is the angle of repose you have here? Okay. So let's see further. So you have like you will see the gravity and debris control. So this is your on the free face here. See, this is your previous one at the time of the faulting you had this one, but later on you had like erosion of this portion and then getting deposition over here. Okay. So the profile, the scarp profile will vary. Okay. And you will have like this portion will keep on is eroded. Okay. So this will keep on eroding, and the material which is coming down from here in form of the larger chunks, what we call the debris material, will be deposited here, and then you will have the wash face material here, and that is mainly the finer one. Okay. So initially the angle of repose what you have, usually we take that 30 to 35 degrees for unconsolidated sediments and 60 to 90 degree for massive hard rock. Okay. So if you are having like more than this angle than what 30 to 35, then you will see that this will keep on eroding, and it will become stable until you reach this angle. Okay. And that is on other side you have the nothing will happen if you the steep face up to 60 to 90 degree, but that is you are talking about the hard rock. Okay. And this we are talking the fault scarp, so you can recall the one of the slide where we were looking at the that the pattern of rupture will depend on the type of material. Okay. So what we have is that we have the slope which has been changed, which was steeper here become gentler, and it will remain it starts stabilizing if you are reaching the angle of repose. Okay, which is for the soft sediments or unconsolidated sediments. Okay. And finally what you see is the slope stabilization. Okay. And that's how what you see the profile. So if you compare the profile which I was showing in the previous slide, okay, probably I am having in the next one, or maybe I can continue in the next lecture. Okay. And we'll discuss more about that what is the importance of the material which has been slided down or eroded and deposited here, and what we can see in the trench if you are coming across with the cluvial wedges. Okay. So I'll stop here and we'll continue in the next lecture.